Tyreek Hill or Stephon Diggs? Adam Peters already made the call on who's lining up as Jaden Daniels' new WR2. And in a minute, I'm telling you which one won the job because the name everybody was banking on, Brandon Ayuk, blew it up himself. And I'm showing you the message that torched the whole deal. While Burgundy and Gold sorts that out, Peters was already working another angle quietly. He signed Rasul Douglas, a Super Bowl ring cornerback, and that move plugs a hole in the secondary that's been hiding in Ashburn for months, though you still don't know how bad that problem really was. And we're closing with something that's got my blood boiling before July's even out. The sportsbooks already slapped a label on this team for Week 9 at home against the Rams, and that label, I'll tell you now, is a straight-up disrespect. I'm breaking down with numbers in a bit. Raise hail. Okay, let's break this down piece by piece because this got messy fast, and I want y'all to understand every layer before I give you my opinion. And fair warning, it's a strong one. For months, the relationship between Brandon Ayuk and the Commanders was basically a social media romance. Ayuk wearing Washington gear, Ayuk talking about Jaden Daniels like they were already teammates, Ayuk dancing on Instagram every time a new rumor dropped. And honestly, I get why the hype was real. Ayuk and Daniels were teammates at Arizona State. There's a genuine relationship there, and a receiver with Ayuk's talent falling into the Commander's lap for a fraction of his value would have been a heist of biblical proportions for Adam Peters. And here's the but that changed everything. Ayuk has spent months burning bridges with literally everybody around him. With the Niners, with John Lynch, with Kyle Shanahan, with his own agent, with the NFLPA. And this past weekend, he decided he also wanted to torch the one bridge he had left standing, Jaden Daniels. It all started at the World Cup when a Niners fan got in Daniels' face yelling some not-so-polite things about Ayuk, and Daniels, instead of defending him, just laughed. That's it. He laughed. For any normal person, that's a total non-event, but Ayuk took it as a personal betrayal and hit Instagram stories with a message that, to me, is the single most self-destructive move I've seen a player make in a long time. He told Daniels word for word that he was on his team now, that he had to follow his rules, that he needed to stop hiding behind his mama. And that's where everything blew up because Jaden Daniels has a publicly known, very close relationship with his mother, Regina, who is also his NFLPA certified agent. Messing with that is just a flat-out dumb move. No calculation behind it whatsoever. Daniels responded with a picture of Kevin Durant giving 2 thumbs down. That's it. He didn't need anything else. And the two of them unfollowed each other online. Now, some analysts like Benjamin Albright are out there saying this could all be theater, a fake beef for content. Look, I could be wrong, but I don't buy that theory at all. Because one day later, Ayuk was back on social media wearing a Commander's hat saying, "Let's run at 5, need you available all season, and I'll do the same," like nothing happened. That's not the behavior of somebody executing a marketing plan. That's the behavior of somebody who knows he messed up and is scrambling to fix it in real time because he literally has nowhere else to go. And this is where I need to be completely honest with y'all as a fan of this team. I'm glad this happened. I'm glad it happened before the signing and not after, because the whole case for bringing in Ayuk always rested on a massive bet on his character, not his talent. His former general manager in San Francisco, Scott McCloughan, who also passed through the Commanders organization later, already warned about this back in the 2020 draft. He said word for word that Ayuk was a number 1 receiver talent, but that you had to be extremely careful with his personality, that back at Arizona State he was already getting into trouble, that Herm Edwards himself described him as a wild card who could either have the best game of his career or just not show up. That was 6 years ago. And the exact same pattern repeated itself in San Francisco. So when somebody asked me if the Commanders should be sad about losing out on Ayuk, my answer is no, with one condition: that they replace him with somebody who solves the actual problem, production, without bringing along the locker room drama that comes free with Ayuk. And this is where things actually get interesting. Because over the last few weeks, 2 names have emerged competing for that spot, and they're complete opposites. The first one is Tyreek Hill. Look, talking about Tyreek Hill is talking about a still active Hall of Fame career, 8-time Pro Bowler, 6-time All-Pro, Super Bowl champion with Kansas City, 13,600 yards of total production in his career, 83 receiving touchdowns. This man redefined what it means to be a vertical threat in the modern NFL. But this carries a lot of weight. Hill is 32 years old, coming off a knee injury that wrecked his 2025 season after just 4 games, and he was cut by Miami back in mid-February. Analysts like Frank Schwab of Yahoo Sports already pointed out the logical panic around his situation. If Hill was as good as advertised, why is he still unsigned months after the draft? The combination of age and a knee injury is the obvious answer, but there's a part of this story that genuinely has me intrigued. Hill didn't retire. He posted on Instagram that the cheetah will be back and then dropped a video showing his rehab, a video literally titled Cheetah Reborn. That's not the behavior of somebody who's resigned to ending his career. And if you look at the numbers from the 4 games he did play in 2025 before the injury, he averaged 12.6 yards per catch, a number that confirms his speed was still fully intact right up until the moment the knee gave out. So the real question isn't whether Hill can still play at the elite level that made him famous. The real question is whether his body, at 32, lets him sustain that level across 17 games. The second name is Stefon Diggs, and here the whole analysis shifts completely. Diggs is coming off a season with New England where he caught 85 passes for 1,013 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaging nearly 12 yards a catch, and he was a central piece in the Patriots' run all the way to the Super Bowl where they fell to Seattle. That's not a declining player masking his drop-off with volume. That's real production against AFC defenses in a year where a lot of people had already written him off after his knee injury in Buffalo. Brian Diardo of CBS Sports is the one who floated this matchmaking, and his argument holds up. Instead of waiting on Ayuk, who was always going to carry locker room risk, the Commanders could just sign somebody who already proved in his last full season that he's still capable of producing at a high level. And there's an emotional detail that matters here too. Diggs is originally from the D.C. area. That feels like a player coming back home, and that weighs emotionally more than any stat line can capture. Now, here's my real tactical comparison, the one that actually matters for what David Blau does as offensive coordinator. Terry McLaurin remains, without question, this team's WR1, and that doesn't change no matter who walks in the door. The real question is what kind of complement Jaden Daniels needs next to him. With Deebo Samuel off the roster, the man who led the team in catches, yards, and touchdowns last season with 72 catches, 727 yards, and 5 scores, and with rookie Antonio Williams out of Clemson, still having proven absolutely nothing at the pro level, Washington has a real hole, not an imaginary one, at that second receiver spot. If they pick Hill, they're betting on pure speed. A guy capable of stretching the field vertically and forcing defenses to play with 2 deep safeties, which automatically opens up more room for McLaurin on intermediate routes and clears the middle of the field for a guy like Williams working out of the slot. That's a high-ceiling, high-risk bet because nobody can guarantee the knee holds up. If they pick Diggs, they're betting on consistency and route-running precision. Diggs isn't as fast as peak Hill, but he's a technician on short and intermediate routes, exactly the kind of receiver a quarterback coming off an injury-plagued season needs for reliable options when the first read isn't there. Here's my personal take, and I know this is going to spark some debate. I'd sign Diggs before I sign Hill, not because Hill lacks the talent, he's got plenty of it, but because the risk profile is completely different. Diggs played a full, healthy season last year and made it to the Super Bowl. Doing it, Hill hasn't played a complete season of football in almost 2 years, and on a roster that's genuinely trying to contend again, trying to get back into the NFC conversation. You can't build your offensive plan around a medical coin flip. That said, I get the appeal of Hill completely. If Adam Peters believes he can land him on a short, low-risk contract and Washington sits among the top 5 teams in the league in salary cap space, that risk becomes a lot easier to swallow. And if Hill shows up healthy for week 1, that pairing with McLaurin would be flat out terrifying for any NFC defensive coordinator. What I can guarantee you is this: Adam Peters is not walking into training camp with this position unresolved. We already saw how he moved on the cornerback signing coming up next. This is a general manager who spots a hole and fills it, not one who sits around waiting to see what happens. All right, let's set the receiver drama aside for a second because something happened this same week that almost nobody's talking about enough. And to me, it's a quiet but genuinely smart move from the front office. While everybody had their eyes locked on the receiver drama, Adam Schefter dropped the news Monday morning. The Commanders signed veteran cornerback Rasul Douglas to a one-year deal worth up to $3.8 million. And I know on paper this doesn't sound as sexy as a potential Hill or Diggs signing, but hear me out, because this move solves a problem that's been hiding behind all the noise. Douglas has a long, unusual career. He was drafted in the third round back in 2017, pick 99 overall by the Philadelphia Eagles. As a rookie, he started 5 games, picked off 2 passes, and ended up winning Super Bowl 52 with that team. After 3 seasons as a part-time starter, he was released in September 2020, and from there, he built a full journeyman career: Carolina, Las Vegas, Houston, Arizona, Green Bay, and Buffalo, where he started 15 games in 2024. Last season, he landed in Miami, where he started all 13 games he played, racking up 62 tackles, 1 sack, 2 interceptions, 13 passes defended, and a forced fumble. And there's one specific moment worth mentioning. In Week 14 against the Jets, he grabbed an interception and defended 5 passes in the same game, earning AFC Defensive Player of the Week honors. Now, why does this matter for Washington specifically? Because this team's cornerback room was honestly scary thin. Trey Amos, the second-year corner who came in with a ton of projection after a second-round selection, fractured his fibula and couldn't even participate in mandatory minicamp while he rehabs. Mike Sainristil remains the anchor piece of that secondary, but behind him and Amick Robertson in the slot, real depth was basically non-existent, with Akello Witherspoon as the only other option and a constant injury history attached to his name. And this connects directly to something we've already been talking about on this channel. Adam Peters, in his 3rd year as general manager, went aggressive on the defensive front 7. He signed Odaf Owa, signed Kelevon Chason, signed Leo Chenal, retained Nick Cross at safety, and used the number 7 overall pick on Sonny Styles. All of that investment was aimed at fixing a defense that finished dead last in the entire league last season, but that left cornerback as a secondary priority, almost forgotten, completely overshadowed by the receiver drama. Now Peters quietly closed that blind spot without generating a single sensational headline. And to me, that's the move of a mature general manager. Not every signing has to be flashy to matter. What Douglas brings to this roster goes beyond the field, too. ESPN's John Keem reported that the players' representatives had been in talks with Peters for a while, and they finally reached an agreement right before training camp starts, giving Douglas a full training camp and preseason to learn the scheme. And as a veteran who's already been through 6 different organizations, who already won a Super Bowl as a rookie, Douglas can become exactly the kind of mentor Sainristil and Amos need as they enter the most important stretch of their young careers. It's not a coincidence that the organization is bringing him in right as those 2 young corners are dealing with their own challenges, one recovering from injury, the other chasing consistency after an up-and-down season. I want to be honest about expectations here because I don't want to sell you smoke. Douglas isn't the star that fixes this secondary's root problem. At 31 years old, turning 32 right before the season starts, this is a floor signing, not a ceiling signing. What it does is guarantee that if Amos isn't ready in time, or if Sainristil hits a rough patch, this secondary's level doesn't fall off a cliff the way it did last year. And in a league where depth wins championships just as much as talent on paper, that's worth a whole lot more than the headline suggests. This team looks better today than it did yesterday, and that line, simple as it sounds, is exactly what you want to hear from your general manager in the middle of July. Mo. Fam, this one's quick, but I need y'all to hear it because to me, this feels like disrespect dressed up as market analysis. Hogs Haven dropped their Week 9 preview when the Rams come to Landover, and sportsbooks already have Los Angeles favored by 4.5 points on the road. 4.5 points is a massive margin for a traveling team, and that's the kind of number that tells you the market already assumes the Rams are back in Super Bowl contention this year. The total is set at 50.5, which also tells you something. They're expecting a touchdown for touchdown shootout, not a defensive grind. And look, I get where the respect for Los Angeles comes from. That's a roster built to compete again, but here's my problem with that number. The Commanders are coming off a 2025 season that ended 5 wins and 12 losses, sure, but just 1 year before that, in 2024, this exact core made the NFC Championship game at 12-5. This isn't a roster rebuilding from scratch. This is a roster that had a rough injury-filled year and is now walking into this Week 9 matchup with a completely retooled defense, with Rasul Douglas fresh on the roster, with Sonny Styles in his rookie season, and with Jaden Daniels, when healthy, being one of the most dynamic young quarterbacks in the entire league. I'm not saying we win that game, guaranteed. Look, I could be wrong, and the Rams are a real problem. But 4.5-point underdogs in your own building in Landover against a team that still has to prove it can win on the road under pressure, that feels like it completely underrates what this roster can be if it shows up healthy in October. Save this clip. We're coming back to this in a few months. And that wraps up today, fam. Look, I know we started with Ayuk torching his own shot in record time, and honestly, I believe this franchise comes out ahead from that story, not behind. The real question now is whether Adam Peters leans toward the speed and risk of Hill or the consistency and hometown ties of Diggs, and that decision is going to define how this offense looks in September. Then we saw a quiet but necessary signing in Rasul Douglas, giving real floor to a secondary that needed exactly that. And we closed with a Vegas number that, as a fan of this team, feels like it's begging to get shoved right back down their throats in Landover this November. This franchise has history, this franchise has identity, and this year it's got a real shot to prove that 2025 was the pothole, not the new normal. If this video gave you something, drop the like, subscribe, and tell me down below. Would you rather have Tyreek Hill or Stephon Diggs wearing burgundy and gold this season? I want to read every single answer. Raise hail. See y'all in the next one.